talk about some of these head coaching firings in the NFL as the NFL season has concluded, and the Monday after the NFL season is identified as Black Monday in the NFL. We have multiple head coaches who were fired. Before I get into the head coaches that were fired, let's talk about the head coaches that were fired during the season. The Tennessee Titans, they fired Brian Callahan. The New York Giants, they also fired Brian Daboll during the season as well. They tried to get ahead in the head coaching search. And then after the season concluded Sunday, the Falcons, they fired former head coach Raheem Morris and general manager Terry Fontenot. The Raiders fired Pete Carroll. It was one and done for Pete Carroll in Las Vegas. The Browns fired Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland as well. But the biggest domino to fall in the head coaching firings was the Ravens firing John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh was one of the best head coaches during his era as Ravens head coach. During his time as Ravens head coach, John Harbaugh, he went 193 and 124, which means he's won 60% of his games as Ravens head coach. He had 12 playoff appearances on his resume. He went 13 and 11 in the playoffs as the Ravens head coach. He won the Super Bowl back in 2012. It was the Harbaugh Bowl. John Harbaugh beat Jim Harbaugh. That was when Jim Harbaugh was a member of the San Francisco 49ers. So John got the best of Jim that day. And John Harbaugh also won 2019 NFL Coach of the Year. And so to me, when it comes to the Ravens and John Harbaugh, I believe John Harbaugh is one of the best coaches in the NFL. And during his time as the Ravens head coach, he was a top 10, arguably top 5 head coach in the NFL. And when you talk about best coaches in pro football, I think about the Andy Reids of the world. I think about the Sean Paytons of the world. I think about the Mike Vrabels of the world. John Harbaugh's name deserves to be in that conversation. I just think we reached a point with the Ravens where it was time for a change. And I said this about Mike Tomlin with the Pittsburgh Steelers, that sometimes you just have to part ways. Sometimes the messenger's message does not get through to the audience the way that it once did. And you have to part ways and move on. John Harbaugh had a great tenure as their head coach in Baltimore. And I believe that now that he's no longer the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, I believe John Harbaugh will be a top candidate for any job that he wants as a future head coach. It doesn't matter where John Harbaugh wants to go, he will have his choice. And I believe he emerges as the best candidate as far as head coaches who are in the market and teams that are in the market for a head coach. So big shout out to John Harbaugh. I just think his time was up in Baltimore, and they had a lot of success in Baltimore when it comes to John Harbaugh and the Baltimore Ravens. They were a perennial playoff team year in and year out. But let's talk about these other coaches that were fired. Let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons, they fired Raheem Morris and general manager Terry Fontenot. In 2 seasons, Raheem Morris went 16 and 18. The Falcons, they finished the season 8-9. At one point, they were 4-9. So they finished the season on a 4-game winning streak. And after the Falcons beat the Saints in Week 18, you had players like Bijan Robinson and Drake London they gave words of encouragement and basically signed off on the idea of the Atlanta Falcons retaining Raheem Morris. Robinson and London wanted the Falcons to keep Raheem Morris as their head coach. They talked about him in their post-game press conferences, but ultimately, owner of the Falcons, Arthur Blank, decided to move off of Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot. And to me, the mistake that general manager Terry Fontenot and former head coach Raheem Morris made was when they signed Kirk Cousins in free agency. They signed Kirk Cousins and gave him $100 million in guarantees in 2024 at the beginning of free agency. But then they turned around and drafted Michael Penix out of Washington. That made no sense to me. That made no sense. If you were going to draft Michael Penix, why did you go and sign Kirk Cousins to a contract that gave him $100 million in guaranteed money? That made no sense. And to me, they didn't have any stability at the quarterback position because you had a veteran quarterback like Kirk Cousins on your roster, and then you have this young quarterback in Michael Penix. The football team is wondering, who's our quarterback? Who's going to be the leader of this football team? And so to me, that was the beginning of the end for former head coach Raheem Morris and former general manager Terry Fontenot when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons. Made no sense for them to sign Kirk Cousins to that big contract with all those guarantees, and then you go out and then you draft Michael Penix. That made no sense. Now, the Arizona Cardinals, they also fired Jonathan Gannon. Jonathan Gannon, in 3 seasons as Cardinals head coach, he was 15-36. He went 3-14 this season. That was the most losses in Arizona history. When it comes to Jonathan Gannon and the Arizona Cardinals, I kind of feel like Jonathan Gannon got a raw deal. And to me, he was not fairly assessed as a head coach. And the reason why I say that is he didn't honestly get an opportunity to draft a quarterback of his choice. When Jonathan Gannon took over as head coach in Arizona, Kyler Murray was already the quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. And they had already signed Kyler Murray to a new contract. So Gannon essentially had to take on Kyler Murray and his big contract. They never allowed Gannon to draft a quarterback of his choice. And usually these head coaches, they want to draft a quarterback of their choice, the head coaches and the general managers. They usually want to draft the quarterback of their choice and attach their success or failure to that particular quarterback of their choice. But Jonathan Gannon was forced to have to deal with not only just Kyler Murray, but Kyler Murray's contract as well. And then this past season, Kyler Murray was injured majority of the season. I also feel like Kyler Murray could have came back and played earlier this season, but the Arizona Cardinals, they didn't want to have to pay Kyler Murray more money because I believe he had some incentives in his contract. And had he been able to knock off some milestones, they would have had to pay him more money. And the Cardinals did not want to have to pay Kyler Murray more money. And that's probably going to be Kyler Murray's last season in Arizona. But I thought overall Jonathan Gannon kind of got screwed because he did not get an opportunity to draft the quarterback of his choice. And then, honestly, that Arizona Cardinals football team dealt with a ton of injuries this season. A ton of injuries. That running back room was a revolving door once James Conner went out. They didn't have any consistency at the quarterback position once Kyler Murray got injured. Jacoby Brissett is not a quarterback that you can actually win football games with. And then even that defense dealt with a bunch of injuries. And offensively, when I look at their roster from an offensive standpoint, besides Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride, who's on the offensive side of the ball that you can look at and say this is an elite player? So I think Jonathan Gannon honestly got screwed. Raiders, Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll was one and done after one season in Las Vegas. His 14 losses this season was the most losses in a season as a head coach, as the Raiders finished 3-14. To me, this was a bad marriage to begin with when it comes to Pete Carroll and the Las Vegas Raiders. They should have never hired Pete Carroll. Their first choice was Ben Johnson, but once Ben Johnson decided to go to Chicago, the Raiders essentially settled for Pete Carroll. And Pete Carroll brought Geno Smith with him to Las Vegas. They both previously were in Seattle together, and I thought that was a mistake as well. I think Geno Smith's best days are behind him. He is no longer a franchise quarterback that you can build your team around. Geno Smith dealt with a bunch of injuries this past year as well. They never really got Jacoby Myers going in the offense. Alshon Jeudy, to me, was also inconsistent as their running back, but that's not even all his fault because they had issues on the offensive side of the ball, so much so Pete Carroll fired Chip Kelly earlier this season as well, and he also fired his special teams coach as well. It was just a mess in Las Vegas, and to me, Pete Carroll is a great NFL head coach. I think he is one of the best head coaches during his era. I believe Pete Carroll's name deserves to be in that same conversation with the Sean Paytons of the world, the Andy Reids of the world, the Mike Tomlins of the world. But I believe Pete Carroll's best days as an NFL head coach are behind him. And to me, the Raiders should look for a more younger NFL head coach. Pete Carroll is an older NFL head coach, and he's forgotten more football than I'll ever know. He's been to the Super Bowl twice. He is a Super Bowl champion as a head coach, but his best days are behind him. I think the game has passed Pete Carroll, and I think the Raiders should try and go young at the head coaching position. Try and get a younger NFL head coach in there as their head coach moving forward. Now, the Browns, they fired Kevin Stefanski after 6 seasons in Cleveland. Stefanski went 45-56 in 6 seasons as Browns head coach. So he won 45% of his games. He went 8-26 in his last 2 seasons as Browns head coach. And when it comes to Kevin Stefanski, I have 2 takes. On one hand, I did not like how Kevin Stefanski treated Shedeur Sanders. It became clear to me that Kevin Stefanski did not want Shedeur Sanders to be successful at the quarterback position in Cleveland. And to me, Kevin Stefanski did not help Shedeur Sanders develop as a quarterback this past season. Shedeur Sanders played in 7 games, and he went 3-4 in those games, but there were flashes of greatness from Shedeur Sanders that I never saw in Dillon Gabriel. And I told y'all before, Shedeur Sanders is a better quarterback than Dillon Gabriel is. And to me, Kevin Stefanski wanted Dillon Gabriel to be the franchise quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, not Shedeur Sanders. And I saw more out of Shedeur in his 7 games than I saw from Dillon in the games that he started. Like, Dillon Gabriel has a ceiling. I think Shedeur's ceiling is higher than Dillon's is. And I thought Stefanski, he did not care for Shedeur Sanders, and he did not help develop Shedeur Sanders along the way. And I thought that was a mistake. And the worst part about it was, and I said it during the season, it didn't make any sense to me why Stefanski was dismissive of Shedeur Sanders, considering Shedeur could have helped Kevin Stefanski actually keep his job had he helped develop Shedeur throughout the season. So that's why it didn't make any sense to me why Stefanski was so dismissive of Shedeur. Shedeur could have possibly helped Stefanski keep his job. But nevertheless, I do believe Kevin Stefanski can actually coach. I do. And the reason why I feel like he can coach, I'm going to compare Stefanski to Zach Taylor. Kevin Stefanski, in 6 seasons as Browns head coach, he's 45-56. So he won 45% of his games. Zach Taylor, as head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, he's 57-65-1. So he won 46% of his games as Bengals head coach. And when I look at a Zach Taylor, I know Zach Taylor has a Super Bowl appearance on his resume as Bengals head coach. I know Zach Taylor went to back-to-back AFC championship games for the Cincinnati Bengals as their head coach. But when I compare what Kevin Stefanski did in Cleveland to what Zach Taylor has done in Cincinnati, to me, Stefanski has done more with less than what Taylor has done in Cincinnati. I'm looking at the Browns, and I look at their offense. The Browns don't have any real elite skill position players. Jerry Jeudy, to me, is the worst receiver to come out of Alabama. Jalen Waddle is better than Jerry Jeudy. Devontae Smith is better than Jerry Jeudy. So to me, what has Stefanski had to work with from a personnel standpoint offensively? I'm looking at a Zach Taylor who has had the luxury of having Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. I think that quarterback and wide receiver combination is the best trio in pro football. And Zach Taylor has missed the playoffs 3 consecutive seasons in Cincinnati. Meanwhile, Kevin Stefanski, despite not having the elite offensive personnel that Taylor has had, Stefanski was a NFL Coach of the Year twice in Cleveland. And he also never had a quarterback the caliber of a Joe Burrow. So to me, it's crazy that Zach Taylor was able to keep his job in Cincinnati and Kevin Stefanski was fired in Cleveland. Because I believe Kevin Stefanski has done more with less in Cleveland than Zach Taylor has done in Cincinnati. But nevertheless, the Browns decided to move off of Stefanski, and they will begin their head coaching search immediately. And the only thing, other knock about Stefanski is I think he's a good NFL head coach, and I believe that he can coach in the NFL. But he also has not truly developed a quarterback. But what also hurt Stefanski was the Browns trading for Deshaun Watson. That hurt Stefanski because Stefanski was expected to work with Deshaun Watson because Deshaun Watson was an elite quarterback in Houston. He has been a shell of himself in Cleveland. That Deshaun Watson in Houston is dead and gone because in Cleveland, he is not the same player. He's not. But Stefanski's had like 13 quarterbacks during his tenure as Browns head coach and never truly developed a quarterback. So that's one knock against Stefanski. But I also believe you have to give Stefanski credit because considering what he's had to work with from an offensive personnel standpoint and never having an elite quarterback or a competent quarterback, that is, he still was able to win NFL Coach of the Year twice and won 45% of his games as head coach. But those are my thoughts on the NFL head coaching firings as we just ended Black Monday in the NFL.